After the horrific mass shooting in Parkland, Florida, the country witnessed an outpouring of sympathy and outrage. Parents immediately thought of the safety of their own children. Students everywhere are discussing it with their teachers. Many are now mobilizing and walking out. The student-led protests against government inaction on the epidemic of gun violence has forced the issue back onto the national stage. Prayers and sympathy messages from politicians are no longer enough. They want to know how politicians are going to make the violence stop. Some socialists suggest this student movement, just for raising the question of gun regulations, empowers the state or threatens the right to self-defense. Others have criticized the students for failing to get at the root of the problem of violence in the United States. Any progressive movement, or movement that has progressive sentiments, that arises spontaneously under capitalism will have contradictions and problems. Any movement that is fighting for reforms, by definition, does not get to the root of exploitation and oppression. But that does not invalidate the struggle for reforms. Further, to quote Malcolm X, "Don't be in a hurry to condemn because he doesn't do what you do or think as you think or as fast. There was a time when you didn't know what you know today." Socialists should engage with solidarity and sensitivity towards the young people who want answers to the question of gun violence. The fact that this student movement is targeting the politicians for being in the pockets of the racist NRA, which itself is entirely in the pockets of weapons manufacturers and gun profiteers, is a good thing. Currently, over 60% of the population supports stricter gun laws. After the Sandy Hook massacre in 2012, in which 26 people were massacred, including 26 and 7-year-old children, much of the population rallied behind stricter gun laws. Washington did nothing. Mass shootings are on the rise, dramatically so. Almost 600 people were killed in mass shootings of this type in 2017, the highest number in modern history. People killed in mass shootings make up just a small fraction of gun deaths in the United States. Over 15,000 people in the United States were killed with guns in 2017. Over 20,000 people committed suicide using a firearm. Black men are 4 times more likely to be shot and killed than white men. Every 16 hours, a woman is killed with a gun by a domestic partner in the United States. The police killed over 1,000 people in 2017. More people were killed by racist police forces last year than in mass shootings. Clearly, the United States is an extremely violent country, much more so than other developed countries. Every single statistic bears that out. This is a social problem of considerable magnitude, and the capitalist ruling class has provided no substantive answers to the millions demanding something be done. It is insufficient for socialists, just because we oppose a capitalist state having a monopoly of force, to say nothing can be done. In fact, the United States was founded on violence. Native genocide, stealing of land, and slavery are not errors that happened in the past, but the very cornerstone of the edifice that is now the United States. The Second Amendment was added to the Bill of Rights as a license for racist vigilante militias, with the overt and covert backing of the United States government, to carry out a reign of terror against Native populations. Slave patrols carried out unspeakable atrocities against the black population as a matter of routine in the enforcement of slavery. Of course, enslaved people would be severely punished if found in the possession of firearms. After slavery, the black codes across the South forbade black people from possessing firearms. When the Black Panther Party powerfully exercised their right to bear arms, the California state legislature rapidly changed the law to criminalize this, with the NRA's support. Philando Castile, a school employee exercising his right to carry a weapon under Minnesota law, was killed on the spot when he announced that he had a gun. And again, the NRA did nothing for him. Tamir Rice, after playing with a toy gun, was instantly murdered by a Cleveland officer. Ohio is an open carry state. Native and black resistance, even when operating within the law, was and has always been met with repression and brutality. The fact that police forces to this day murder Native and black people at a much higher rate than white people is not a coincidence. It is not possible to separate institutional and violent racism from the social and political character of the US state. Capitalism is violent. The vast poverty that we are subjected to and the monstrous inequality of the for-profit system are debilitating forms of violence. In the United States, according to the government's ludicrously low poverty line, 21% of children live in poverty and 34% of Black and Native children live in poverty. Children. Imperialism is violent. The US wars that are fought in the interest of profit and domination against poorer countries are devastatingly violent. Literally, millions have died. Oppression is violent by its very nature. Racism, sexism, and bigotry are all inherently violent and are all a part of, and parcel of the political, social, and economic fabric of this country. Everywhere you look in the culture of the United States, you see violence. And it sells too. While other manufacturing industries have declined in the United States, weapons and gun production have skyrocketed. The US produces, exports, and sells more weapons than the rest of the world, subsidized by the largest military budget in the world. The weapons industry thrives on war, and the United States thrives on war, and is always eager to peddle their goods in new conflict zones, but they have branched out. What started as a slow trend of selling excess military-grade weaponry to local police departments and individuals has now flourished into a vast civilian market. The gun manufacturers and advertisers cultivated the culture around their products and used fear-mongering about terrorism and government confiscation to boost their sales. In a very profound way, it is capitalism, the for-profit economic system we live under, manifested in the weapons manufacturers, the gun lobby, and the NRA that has thwarted any rational public discussion about guns in our society. So what do we do? While the above historical context of US violence is necessary, it is not sufficient to say that capitalism is a root cause of gun violence or that systematic racism is at the heart of the disproportionate impact of gun violence in Black and Latino neighborhoods. People want answers and they want change. There is a national consensus about the need to reduce violence, to have a meaningful dialogue to combat the problem of violence in the United States effectively. Socialists should participate in that conversation with concrete proposals and to make that dialogue wide-ranging and radical. The existing terms of the gun violence debate, gun control versus gun rights, if we are to be honest, are extremely superficial and inadequate to the complexity of the problem. To put it succinctly, under the capitalist system, neither gun control nor gun access has guaranteed people's safety or protected their rights. A broader program is necessary to which socialists have much to offer. For instance, the socialist vision is to reduce and eliminate the violence to which millions are subjected on a daily basis, and to end the exploitation, alienation, oppression, poverty, and competition that fuel violence. This would not be achieved overnight, but under socialism, the working class has real power over the issues that affect their communities. The state would serve their interests. The racists and oppressors of the past would be disarmed and disempowered. Basic needs would be met, and a collectively planned political, social, and economic system would be set up. In Cuba, for instance, guns have not disappeared. In fact, nearly the entire population is trained on how to use guns. But those guns are stored safely in each community, and local organizations, the committees for the defense of the revolution, stand ready to distribute them as necessary. Gun violence and mass shootings are practically non-existent. Point 2, violence interruption, conflict resolution, and social work programs must be fully funded as a national priority. Number 3, Black, Native, Latino, and other oppressed peoples must have the unconditional right to self-determination and self-defense, including the right to carry out the gun control conversation on their own terms. Considering the racist nature of the US state, now led by Donald Trump, the historical and ongoing violence of racist organizations, not to mention the violence meted out against the working class, women, and LGBTQ people, socialists uphold the right on self-defense. This is not a question of constitutional interpretation, but practical necessity in the class struggle. For those organizing in areas where well-armed fascistic forces are confronting them, like in Charlottesville last year, it could very well have been suicidal if the anti-racist movement had dismissed the question of organized self-defense with firearms. Number 4, lift the special legal protections for the arms industry. Weapons manufacturers received special immunity from lawsuits as soon as the assault rifle ban was lifted in 2005. Point 5, ban the marketing and advertising of weapons, similar to the ban on cigarettes, and get corporate money out of politics. Point 6, government-administered background and mental health checks are not the answer. We do not believe the U.S. federal government should be granted any additional new processes that could deepen the discrimination and inequality that already exists in the right to purchase arms. This state, propped up on racism, war, mass surveillance, and oppression, cannot be trusted with this kind of power. Consider the question of background checks for gun purchases, for instance. Very few of the school shooters would have been thwarted by such a procedure, despite their history of violent rhetoric and tendencies. As middle-class white men, mostly in suburbia, they had not been put through the system. Point 7, demilitarize the police and the state. Number 8, the existence of automatic weapons cannot be resolved with a federal ban. At present, 4 to 5 million assault rifles alone are circulating in the population. They are being produced for the police and military every day, and ending their legal sale would at this point undoubtedly create a sprawling underground market. At present, a federal government effort to confiscate guns would undoubtedly target Black, Latino, and working class progressive forces, and not the right-wing social forces that have been stockpiling them. No people's movement is in a position at this time to ensure that gun control of this type would be carried out in a progressive or non-repressive manner. Number 9, required proof of training in shooting and gun safety. Similar to the common sense regulations required for purchasing automobiles, can be extended to firearms without infringing on the right to self-defense. Number 10, demilitarize the schools. No arming of teachers. Point 11, build strong and empowered working class, youth, and neighborhood organizations. In a country where violence seems to so sewn into the DNA, and where violence has been used to keep the vast majority of people very far from power, a strong people's movement from below can offer communities collective security, including self-defense, and build the kind of power to address fundamental problems, including mass shootings and the daily violence in poor neighborhoods. In addition, we must demand the right to employment, education, housing, and healthcare as a foundation of these stronger and more united communities. Large-scale public investments must be made to build up and rebuild the multitude of neighborhoods of poor people that have been abandoned and persecuted by the rulers of this society. We support the students who are marching to reduce gun violence, end mass shootings, and hold the gun manufacturers and their lobbies accountable. At the same time, we support the right of oppressed and working class people to defend themselves. These are not opposed principles. They are both progressive instincts that share a common goal: peace and justice, a life with dignity. We need to be clear. The ruling elite of the United States, which includes people who make enormous profits off of the sale of guns and weapons of war, will not stop the violence. Violence and the profit from it are baked into the U.S. capitalist system. There is an unanatomy in the centers of power to stay committed to the weapons manufacturers as an important way to sustain profits and to prop up the U.S. empire. They see no problem with arms in the hands of white middle-class suburbanites and rich farmers and other right-wing groups. They hope these social forces will continue to side with them if the discontent against the inequality of wealth and oppression in this country grows to the point of rebellion, revolt, and militant multinational unity in the big cities. The U.S. state has decided to go all in on rounding up immigrants with the ICE Gestapo, the militarization of the police forces, domestic spying, the demonization of Black and Native peoples who dare to resist, and a clampdown on dissent in general. The government as a whole, including both major parties, is not overly concerned with the violence in poor and working class communities. It fuels mass incarceration policies and is a considerable weight on the daily lives of the most oppressed that obstructs organizing against the real enemy. The Democratic Party has moved in swiftly to take control of the student movement with a whole assortment of marketing firms, lawyers, and staffers promoting the students only to further their own interests in the 2018 elections. This is complete opportunism and must be exposed. More generally, the U.S. legal and political system is committed to protecting the perpetrators of violence all the time. When one killer cop after another gets away with murder, when war criminals like George Bush walk free, when the architects of dirty wars, coups, and assassinations are not held accountable and are in fact treated like national heroes, we see that the ruling class, as a matter of policy, endorses murder. The only way to break the patterns and culture of violence is for poor and working people to take the economic and political powers of the country into our own hands. When we do that, we will have at our disposal all the resources we would need to unite the vast majority, fix mass shootings, and end the daily violence created by the racist and sexist U.S. capitalist order. All power to the people.